Hi, welcome back, and thanks for joining us in this ever-deepening series of guided meditations into source life, source culture, and entering the long missing code to tap reality at the deepest level that's been encoded in all of our great teachings and scriptures, enlightenment teachings and breakthroughs in science through the ages. We're about to enter the second stage of this journey, and hopefully you were able to go through the first 6 meditations in stage 1 in the first series. And in that series, which was called Our Journey to Source Life, and the source code, the missing source code, and the culture of source life. And we introduced, and using the meditative journeys, we used several meditative calligraphy in our journey to visualize and picture the journey, the epic journey of our human drama over centuries across the planet. And in this second series, we want to build on some of the major astounding themes that opened up for us as we began to see, as never before, what is the source? How do we get to the source? The source sets speaking, whether it's the Yahweh or the Allah or the Brahman or the Yoga or the Logos or the Tao, to pick out a few great, amazing, ingenious attempts to get us to the source. That we must have an intimate flow and intimate relationship with the source, because it's clear medically, scientifically, in source science, that if we're impeded or eclipsed or cut off or blocked off from a more direct, intimate encounter with the source, reality as it is on the ground floor, we're going to enter into human fragmentation and dysfunctions and pathologies and abysmal, wide-ranging forms of human suffering within our personal lives, interpersonal lives, intercultural lives, and the state of humanity on the planet in our evolutionary journey. So in this stage 2, we'd like to, of course, rehearse what are some of the major, astounding breakthrough themes that we couldn't see before without the source code, as this opens up and gains access to the fundamental field. That's been calling humanity for eons. In that space, we suggested that there are astounding themes, one of which, for example, is that humanity in our evolutionary journey across the planet has been involved or implanted within a deeply entrenched program of culture making, self-making, world-making, meaning-making, across our cultures and worlds and religions and arts and sciences for centuries. And we can't see it in that space. It allows us to see, it allows us to have meaning, it gives us our worldview, it gives us our experience, on everything we know and familiar. It allows us to have that. But for that very reason, it creates a deep blind spot that we're not able to see. And that has generated, in the wisdom of our great teachers, this blind spot, the incapacity to see the program, the deep cultural program that gives us our meaning, our language, and our experience, that can be cutting us off from the source in some profound ways, that creates and generates wide-ranging human suffering and pathologies and dysfunctions. That's astounding. So what we'll do in this second stage is let's go deeper, because the findings of the first 6 meditations is that humanity is facing a deep, invisible crisis. Invisible because we can't see it. And we are involved or implanted within, let's call it a motherboard. We call it in the last 6 meditations a smotherboard, because the motherboard of our life and our experience that gives us our language and our meaning and our capacity to experience and have vision and to make sense of things, that very gift and all of the information age that has evolved to a magnificent level over the centuries, especially in the last century, accelerated to where we are now in the 21st century, that very technology can be at the heart and root also of generating human pathologies, dysfunctions, and cutting us off from the source in the way that our great teachers and spiritual leaders have been calling us to see and to rise to a higher level for centuries. So in part 2, we're going to pick up on some of those astounding disclosures of source science. And we're going to see that, I hope, I'd like to go in this meditation, and we're going to enter a deeper series and go deeper and deeper to get the science. Because we are suffering in all kinds of ways. And just because it's normalized, because our culture normalizes it, we may have to see it and recognize it and call it out as pathological or dysfunctional or forms of suffering, even though we know things are not right. Even in the midst of all of our great advances, things are still not right. We're still not getting the medicine of Buddha, of yoga, of Moses, of Jesus, Muhammad, Lao Tzu, Socrates, Plato, all the centuries of genius work calling us to rise higher and to come to human flourishing and well-being. And in our last series of 6 meditations, and it was summed up here. This was our last when we parted last, and it looks highly complicated and it looks almost chaotic. We covered a lot. And it would be great if we could recall from our 6 meditations, why in a way this calligraphy that we generated as a PowerPoint in our meditation, in a way sums up our human situation. We introduced double parentheses to mark when we're in the fundamental field of reality. This is new. We've never had that clearly marked out before. We showed that the dominant space that we live is here. I'll recreate this calligraphy meditatively in a moment, but I just want to pick up and review some of the points. Even so, forgive the appearance of chaos, especially if you're joining us for the first time. But in our first 6 meditations, we systemically built stage by stage to really make sense of this summary picture. That humanity in our evolution has risen to a magnificent point, and this space is where we have our information. We can talk about the world. We have all our world and our experiences and events and entities and narratives and scriptures and arts and sciences. We can talk about it and narrate it in the information space. We saw that this is a screen, so to speak, of cultural awareness where we experience ourselves in our world. And we here, the I and the we, that really is encountering the screen, is seen here between the subjective space of the thinker, the experiencer, and what we experience. So this space between I and the not I, the object, the space of information, is a fundamental feature of culture codes that have evolved and is shared by humanity on a planetary basis. So this is a space in which our information and our events and our lives and our cultures and our religions is all processed here. And this marker, remember, is really, we call it the motherboard that is making this work. And this motherboard, so to speak, the program that we're using in our culture codes, for every aspect of our life, our feelings, our emotions, our human relations, our institutions, our politics, all in this space, our arts and sciences, our liberal arts, all going on when we talk about it. This is the information space, the screen of our human awareness. Whatever culture we're in, we can be in many different cultures. We can change the lens. We have a lens of the mind, and we can have multiple lenses. We saw that. So that when you have, if we're a scientist and using a scientific mind, we've got a scientific world will show up. If we're a religious person and have a biblical view, we'll see the world in a biblical way. So all the different worldviews are all going on and vying in this space. Multicultural, multi-religion, multi-scriptures, arts and sciences, they're all, if you shift the lens and take a different narrative, you'll get a different world. Because this is our life, this is our being, this is reality is showing up here. So that reality is a function of what mental program we're using. Because what we saw is, let's shift focus here for a moment to recall that in this deep space, the double parentheses, and we use single parentheses to mark when we're in this mental space. It was vital in our human journey not to confuse and conflate this space, the Word of God, with the Word of humans, so to speak, with the ego-based monocentre with dialogue space in the Logos. Whether it's a Krishna space, a Christ space, the Buddha space, the Logos space, whatever name we use for the deep space, where everything is interflow. What we invariably do, because this is the language we use, this is our culture, this is our stage of reason and logic, and the Logos, this is our Logos. So anything we hear, we will process here in the familiar language, and we can then cut ourselves off from a deeper access. That was one of the major themes that we saw in looking at the pattern across the planet over the last 3,000 years. This is a picture of where we are. Please recall that the deepest level of reality is an infinite field. We saw that we can't get around that. That reality cannot be finitized. We can't draw boundaries around it. It's boundless. And it's transfinite and infinite. And if it is, that was a game changer. If we really could handle it. And you can't handle it here in this language space, in this mental space. That cuts us off. This line is all important. Somehow, the technology of our culture creates a rift, a split, a distance from access into the space where everything is interflow. That's the infinite space. The unum, we had the word unum pluribus. Everything is interconnected in the deep space. So source science, the missing code, what's the code? How do we go from this code that dominates us now, where we have information in the box, which is magnificent, and all of our great advances in civilization over the eons are really taking place here, but we can never be outside of the fundamental field. That's what this picture is suggesting, capturing centuries of research. That on the ground floor, reality is infinite, and the double brackets, the double parentheses, is a marker to remind us that that's the space of the infinite, and if it's infinite, it's infinitely unified, unum. We use the word unum for that. And that infinite unity connects all possibilities. That's astounding, because it means that all of our different worldviews, our religious worlds, our scriptures, our arts, our sciences, our different cultural narratives, they're all going on in this motherboard of culture making and world making and self making and experience making. And there's something that the great geniuses saw who knew this language. And so our journey is to cross into the deeper space of the source culture and the source world. So all of our different worldviews here, what we begin to see when we go into the unum space, the unum, using the Latin, is infinite unifying connectivity. That is perhaps the deepest insight of source science. All is interflow, interconnected. You cannot have separate pieces or fragments that are broken off from that flow, because the infinite is infinitely unified. You can't have two infinites. So this gesture here is that this is a field, an open, boundless, infinite field of infinite connectivity where everything is interflow and interconnected. But where we are in our cultural evolution, moving up to this high level of tapping the Logos, if you use the word Logos, and this, by the way, we saw in our first 6 meditations, whatever name you use for the infinite force, for the infinite field, whether it's Yahweh, or Allah, or Brahman, or Tao, or Logos, whatever name. It doesn't have to be a God name. It's an ontological name. The science of ontology, ontos logos, the science of being, right? And using the Greek word, the logosophia, right, is one name, but it's not the only name. The point is, when you get to the deep space, if you put Yahweh here, or Allah here, or Om here, or Tao here, whatever name you use for the first, or just the grand unified field of physics, whatever name you use, it's going to be an infinite interflow. So reality encountered here is interconnected, and all the pluribus and diversity is still unum pluribus. It cannot be broken apart, and that's deep dialogue At every point in this field, you can't break the infinite off. You're going to have an infinite encoded. We saw that too in source science. You can't break a piece of the infinite off. If you break a piece of Om, you're going to get Om. If you break a piece of Yahweh, you're going to get Yahweh. If you're going to break a piece of Allah, you can't break it. Because the infinite unity cannot be partitioned. It cannot be fragmented. That's the deep consensus of source science. But source science could not be accessed here because it's desourced by its very nature. And it separates different worlds and narratives and experiences and mental states. And what we're going to see today as we go deeper now, so the challenge is to see that human pathologies here, if this mind operating system, this mental processing pattern that has evolved over eons and has served us well in many respects, and all of our information age is coming out of this technology, and all of our different narratives that we have and processing here, when we make meaning and truth and understand events and life and develop our politics and human relations, all going on here, as great as that is in the information age, it separates, it fragments, and it generates this pathologies and dysfunctions. So that the call of our great source pioneers is to make see this, we've got to see this, that the motherboard of our lives and our cultures and religions and arts and sciences and education and politics, everything, economics, everything going on here under this regime, it's a regime, has colonized our humanity in the sense that we have not been liberated into the space of the pluribus unum, where everything is interconnected. And you go from a human here, under this space, becomes separated and isolated. But when we cross, if we cross, how do we cross into the source space? We need the source code, the missing source code that Jesus and Buddha and Moses and Krishna and Lao Tzu and Mohammed and our great geniuses through the ages are calling us to find the code that will take us into the pluribus unum, interconnected flow, where we experience directly the links and connectivity of reality. That's a quick review of what we've seen so far, and what we want to do this time is to remember one of the points we saw is that no culture or narrative or world or scripture or religion can step outside of the infinite space. The infinite space is always holding us and funding us. We couldn't breathe. We couldn't see, we couldn't think, we couldn't have an experience, we couldn't use language, we couldn't even deny. If we deny that there is logos, we're affirming it, because you cannot step outside of being sourced by the fundamental source field. The infinite field is sourcing all, and that's the fundamental field of reality. And we need the code in order to intimately encounter reality, the way it is, and the way we are, because here we're cut off from a deeper encounter with ourselves and each other and nature, and the flow of reality and multiple worlds and scriptures and arts and sciences all interflow here. Every word here is interconnected. Why? Because the infinite is infinitely unum, or unified, and all of the multiple diversity of reality is still connected and interflowed by the infinite power. It takes a special code, a missing code, to be able to access that. And pioneers like Jesus, I am the way, I am the code, I am the truth, the logos and the flesh. For example, Buddha, the Buddha calls this emptiness, this field, because you cannot take these pieces and objects and entities and beings and cross it into that infinite field. They can't survive. They disintegrate because they're pieces, they're artificial pieces. And our relationships here are artificial relationships until we go into the I-thou. This is a huge, one of the astounding findings of our first 6 meditations. Who are we if we understood ourselves in the missing source code and could tap the voltage of the space? We will see that the I am, the I, is always interconnected with the other. The I am is I-thou. A human is an I-thou, the thou meaning the other. There is otherness, but always interconnected. And that is the I-thou space. Here, however, in this motherboard, the I is disconnected from the other. The other is an it, an object, a being, an entity. An it, I, it, or I thou in the space where everything is interflow. And the consensus of our great teachers and scriptures and enlightenment is that we must find a way to cross from this cultural space, which is cut off, and rise into the space of, that's what yoga is. Yoga is here, the Om, access to the Om. This is the Christ, to enter the Christ, where I and thou are connected. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I'm hungry, you fed me. That's a logic and science of source code, of interconnectivity. Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, great on and on Socrates, seeing the interconnectivity in the logosphere, rather than the egosphere, where you have monologue. It is monologue. The other is objectified, and it's a form of violence. This is violent. Even though we don't intend it, it's violent. And our great teachers are saying we've got to rise into non-violence, into non-fragmentation. And we can't do it with this motherboard. So the motherboard that dominates and gives us our vision and our culture here cannot be seen within this space. We can't see this picture. To see this picture, we've got to step into the deep space and understand the unum, that infinite unum pluribus is connected. That is a deep understanding of reality, and to be cut off from it is devastating for our human well-being. That's a quick recap of our earlier journey. And what I hope to do now in this second sequel is that let's go deeper. Because we didn't have enough time in the first 6 meditations. Now in the 7th meditation and what will follow in stage 2, we'd like to understand more deeply, all of us. If I'm living in this motherboard and I don't see it, if I'm living in this space, and this is me, and my multiple selves too, because I can live in multiple narratives, as we've seen. If this is where we are living, and we're cut off from the access to source, and this is causing fragmentation and polarization, so that widespread human dysfunctions, racism, sexism, homophobia, Holocaust, genocide, ethnic cleansing, clash of worlds, terrorism, war, objectifying one another, slashing our kids by raising them. If we're raising our children in this space, a child, and we're objectifying one another, we may not intend it. We're good people, we're good parents, but we could be slashing. This is a slashing that cuts us off from human flow and thriving. This is where our being thrives. We're human beings. And our being is here, because that's reality, is being, and being is interflow, infinite connectivity and flow. And we need the code to experience and access that. And when we say I am, here, I, not this I, but I am, we're able to now make that crossing, which is what Jesus was modeling, and Buddha was modeling, and Krishna was modeling. And Socrates was saying, we've got to leave the cave and come into the Logos. Have we really gotten the medicine of our great teachings? Have we gotten the deep science of the source? So what we need to do now, I suggest, let's go. Please stay with me. And I'll try to seek through my 50 years of deep experimentation in the great narratives across the planet of our wisdom and enlightenment teachers and teachings and scriptures and sciences and arts. Let's look and see what would it take for us to live here? If America is here, for example, to take that culture, which we did in our prior 6th meditation, when we said there's an unfinished human revolution. The human journey in our evolution and growth and human development is to rise into the space where we're interconnected and can see it and experience this and live our culture in that nonviolent I-thou deep dialogue encounter of the first kind, rather than objectifying one another, slashing ourselves, our events, our mental states, our narratives, our scriptures, the Word of God. Because if we can't get the Word of God here, if the Word of God is here, for example, just one example, if Scripture and the Word of God is here, this is where the God Word is. The Logos is the infinite Word, and we're using this, and we're dominated by this regime of interpretation and making sense of things and translating. And this is where we translate all we hear from our great teachers, then we're slashing it and not getting the medicine. So in the first 6 meditations, we just had that encounter, the journey to source. And we saw some of the great themes, that there is an invisible crisis. And what is that crisis? That we cannot see that there is a deeply implanted program that makes our culture and our lives and our experiences, but also produces abysmal fragmentation of all kinds. When our children are suffering, for example, and they're lost and they can't find meaning, this is where we find genuine meaning, in the foundation and the source. This is when we light up and glow with meaning, when we're sourcing and resourcing. When athletes somehow spontaneously are in the zone and in peak performance, for example, or artists or lovers, when we're in that high space and out of this mind and out of this body and out of this separation of objectification, and somehow step outside of the motherboard that's a smotherboard and can flow when the runner is the running, for example, when we're one with the activity. That's an example of the unum flow, of surfing the space of reality more deeply. That's peak performance, and we know it feels magnificent. Our great thinkers call this nirvana, the kingdom of God, whatever name you heaven, all of that name. Why? Because it's flourishing, it's blissful, it's well-being. But if we're cut off, we have our ill-being. Our being can be ill, and we haven't developed a language sufficiently for a mass culture of ontology. Ontology is being, from the Greek. Ontos is being, and ontos logos is the science of being. And the science of being is not talk about it. It's not a theory. It's not a narrative. It is to surf being in a direct way. To be in the zone of peak performance. And that's human flourishing. So our right to be is blocked by the regime that dominates our culture making and all of our great advances. And we saw in the first 6 meditation that it's undeniable that we've made great strides over the millennia. The evolution of science, using this technology of information and finding connections and just getting laws and principles and getting theories and going from Ptolemy to Copernicus, Einstein, all changing the lens, deepening it, but still within that dominant motherboard. All of our moral advances, so our spiritual evolution, the wisdom in unfolding, human rights, our political institutions, the birth of democracy. These are great advances. Free the slaves. Women can vote. Gays have rights, they're human. Right? These steps are important and they're going on, but within the cultural space that's dominated by this deeply entrenched motherboard that can be a smotherboard because it can smother us from access to a deeper humane space where our cultures arise and meet, our religions and scriptures and arts and sciences and diversity flourish together in that interconnected space. So what we'd like to do in this second series, I just quickly rehearsed that, some of the highlights of a prior meditation. And what I would like to do is just quickly rehearse what we've gotten here. Double brackets, every word that we use in this language, single brackets. And when we cross into the source science and source space and culture, where of interconnectivity, of the unum pluribus connected flow of deep dialogue, that is double brackets, double parentheses. So every word here, A, has an analog when we cross into A. Here it's interconnected with the entire field because it's the infinite space and every point is interconnected. You can't break it apart. And we need the code, the double bracket code, the source code that has been long emerging in our great teachings across the planet in order to gain access from this single bracket code into the double bracket space. In this space are different worlds, all of our narratives and alternative scriptures and worldviews and ideologies all vie for, they're using this technology That's not been seen. So to call it out and say the single bracket space is a motherboard and a smotherboard for all our life here is going to be fragmented. People are going to suffer. They're going to look for meaning. They have midlife crises. What is that? It's seeking to get well grounded in meaning and well-being and knowing somehow we're cut off. And we don't realize that our culture, technology, and code itself is cutting us off. That's not been seen. So to call out the single bracket space, this motherboard, and to see it, which can't be seen in here, you've got to step back into the source space to see that this is going on. And names have been given all through the centuries for this condition that we may have seen it. When you say sin, what is sin? We're born in sin. We're born into this space. We don't realize that sin is a script, it's a code, it's a culture code, it's an identity code, it's a karmic code. And it cuts us off. So this line is almost in terms of medical science, ontological medicine. Right? That's one of the themes that came out in our first 6 meditations that has never been seen before, because we didn't have source science more fully articulated. We didn't have the full code of the unum pluribus before, but our being, the science of being, right, is medical, because this situation is a medical condition. It's a pathological condition of suffering and brokenness, a broken being. We cannot have wholeness of being here and cut off from access into the well-being. So our right to life, liberty, and happiness and well-being is our right to be. This is where we can be. This is where we're unbe. We're pre-be. We're not being yet fully, because our deepest code, as great as it is to give us all of our advances, such as they are still broken off from deep interconnected flow. So what we'd like to do in this second stage meditation, building on the astounding disclosures of our first 6 meditations, journey into source life and source culture with the source code, access to the source code, and to see that our deep alienation from source, if we're desourced, to see one of the scientific axioms of deep ontology. And let's call that medical ontology. Ontology is medicine, the medicine of our being, and we haven't had a language that our being can be broken, and we have existential or ontological pathologies. Existential philosophers have talked about existential issues, existential angst and suffering, and la nausée of Sartre, for example, or Descartes seeing that he could doubt it all. And if he doubts it all, then he's shaken, because where's the truth? Because he saw that he could doubt it all. He was actually discovering that he could doubt all of his beliefs. Our belief systems are here. Our beliefs are part of the information narratives that we hold. Our mental states are belief. But if this technology partitions and breaks the flow of our mental psychic life, we're going to have broken mental states and broken worlds, and therefore the clash of worlds. So the quest for being and quest for meaning and truth is a quest to enter into this, and we can only gain that if we see this and call it out and find the strategies of our genius pioneers to break the barrier and break this. And in the East, this is called samsara. These words are familiar. If you go east, samsara is a place of suffering. It's repeating cycles. Why? Because the culture code is passed on generation after generation, repeat the same blockages. It cuts us off. So whether it's sin or samsara, it's the same medical condition when seen in a global light, in a source light. This is global space. Why global? Because all narratives, all worlds are funded and coming out of this. That's huge to really recognize that. That all of our scriptures, all of our narratives, all of our arts and sciences, all of our disciplines, all of our ideologies, all of our perspectives must be situated within the infinite field and must be deeply connected in the source. When you're desourced, you can't find the connection. But when you cross this all-important line, which is Buddha's awakening, which is yoga, which is Lao Tzu, Tao, martial arts, entering the zone, entering the Christ, the I am space of Moses, the God name, the Allah, surrender to Allah, Rumi, when he says there's a field beyond debate or judgment, which is going on here. I'll meet you there. Those are examples of the mystics. All the great mystics are seeing into this field. They're seeing beyond the barrier because we can do that. We have that code. The double bracket code is within all of us. We're logos sapiens, logos. We're logos, not mono sapiens or ego sapiens. We're logos sapiens. So the question of source medicine and source medical is to have the code of the source, to experience the interconnectivity. Everything turns upon that in our future well-being. As who are we? Is this who we are here with this motherboard dominating our lives? It colonizes us. Or can it be that we're bound here and that this is where we're free as we enter the liberating space? And our great geniuses knew that. This is freedom, moksha, freedom, liberation. From what? From a regime of mental codes and practices and patterns that break the circuit and separate and fragment and brings our worlds to be worlds apart, and our experiences and our human relations are just in a meltdown and cannot find the noble, healthful interconnectivity of love. Love is here. It's a double bracket phenomenon. Hope, faith, all of these major words, wisdom, enlightenment, compassion is here. It's not here. So it's no wonder that the medical diagnostic of our life in this space is going to reveal that we're broken in fundamental ways. When we seek real meaning, we're going to discover that ultimately, if we get to question it, we cannot find the ground of meaning, the source of meaning here. It's here. It's here. And therefore, we go into agony and midlife crisis. And it can produce suicide. This is what's the point? There's no raison d'etre. There's no point in it. It's empty. It's a myth of Sisyphus repeating a cycle that doesn't get anywhere. It's ennui. It's boredom. It's pointless. If you're cut off from the logos, from the source, from the light that's sourcing all of this, you couldn't have any of these stories or narratives or worlds or versions of yourself without the source. But if you're desourced, you're missing the contact with your foundation. To be desourced is an ontological malady. And our great teachers knew that. That's why Buddha said, his opening axiom, existence here is suffering. It has a cause. We have a choice. And we can rehabilitate our lives. The Four Noble Truths of Buddha is really following this pattern of crossing from disconnection and dualism and fragmentation, polarization, alienation, atomization, objectification, reduction into flow of interconnectivity that is nirvana, well-being. That was Buddha's medicine. Just pick up the Buddha point. That's Jesus. I am the way. I am the truth. This I am is the code. And the Christ code is here. The Buddha code is here. The Yoga code is here. The Socrates Logos code is here. So if our great geniuses and pioneers into source science were calling us, but hitting the language barrier, the culture barrier, the code barrier, we keep interpreting it here. And we blow it because we can't access the power of the medicine of our great first teachings. So this is just a rehearsal of some of the astounding points that comes in our quest for source life and the missing code. And to see the importance of the single bracket, that was never seen before. That was never made clear. That as diverse as our world, the scientific, the biblical, our political life, economic, all of these narratives are still situated in the field. It cannot not be. Whatever exists in our world is being sourced. And if we're broken from the source, we're broken from the deeper meaning. So any word here that's cut off is going to take a deeper meaning when we take it into the deep field. So I playfully say with my students when I'm coaching them in our meditations, as we study together, in terms of going from this language here, let's say English here, is not the same as English here. Zen language, Zenglish, to playfully say it. When you're speaking Zen, what is it? Mindful. What is mindful? Beingful. What is that? Heads up. Situational awareness, which is about seeing the deep interconnectivity, the continuum of reality and experiencing it. The moon in a dewdrop. Infinity in a grain of sand. Eternity in an hour. All of those great genius moments is really calling us to this language. It's a deeper access to the word. This is the word, the infinite word. This is an objectified word. Language here is not the same as language there. So in this second stage, let's go deeper, because, all right, you might follow the first 6 meditations. And this 7th meditation, which is a guided meditation into Source, is rehearsing some of the main points that came out. But now let's do the science. The science is here. Everything is interconnected. Take the word time, double bracket time, is connected with space and with mind and with lens. Everything is interconnected. If you understand double bracket time here, you will see the power of now. You can't see the power of now here. Space is infinite. Mind flows. Connected all the way through. Mind and body here is separate from mind. When you're here, body, double bracket body, is bodyful. It is mind-body. You can't sever it. So what we begin to see as we begin to look at the source medicine, the source ontology for healing the broken being in all of its forms, is that when you enter this space, the unum space, you actually become linked in. This is the link. You experience it. You cannot separate anymore. Time, past and future, and now is now. The infinite now connects. The space and time is space-time. Einstein got that. The space-time continuum. And mind and word, it's not mind here and word here. It's mind-word. The word and mind and life and space and time and I and thou and nature are all profoundly interwoven. And the source code is how we're able to process and experience that in the zone. That's where we belong. So the human development over millennia is wonderful to have information. The digital revolution, digital logic, computer science, for example, linking the world in web, right? That's beautiful. To connect us in telecommunications, all the medical breakthroughs, all the political advances in the struggle to have democracy, our struggle for human rights and ethics, a struggle to find the Christ and do the yoga and be the martial artist and be the highest artist you can and fulfill our being. All of that going on here is still hitting walls and limits that we can overcome by seeing it, calling it out, which is a prerequisite for being able to access connectivity and the primacy of life and interflow. This is where we experience the continuum of reality. The unum pluribus continuum of reality is flowing in the deepest way. And it's a world of difference to be in the zone and being one with space and time and mind and word and mind and body and I and thou. It's one thing to be there in that communion of encounter and another thing to talk about it. In this motherboard, we talk about it. We can narrate about it. We can tell a story. We can say, let's get a paradigm shift. Let's get a new story. There's a new story. Stardust to us. The Big Bang. It's a new story. Not Genesis. Big Bang. You can have a new story, but you're still storying here, and you're not getting the deep shift is the shift into the source code, into the source field, into source life. That all of our great geniuses, scriptures are calling us to enter into this amazing space of our being. That's well-being. That's human flourishing. That's nonviolence. That is democracy. And if America is here, imagine what America will be here in this space. The land of the free, not a colonized people. Any culture that's living here is colonized by this regime. And we saw in our prior 6th meditation and 5th meditation, when we looked at the example of America, that 1776 could be here, the Declaration, the visionaries, the intelligence of our visionaries are founding the blueprint for democracy, for the United States, the United Colonies. We're really touching the space of we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all persons are endowed by the source with unalienable rights to life, liberty, well-being, happiness. And governments are meant to support that, and if it doesn't, we must call it out. If we see 1776 here, it's a new ballgame for America, for civic space. And now we know that we're in trouble. Our civic space is fragmented. It's pathological. There's no deep dialogue. It's monologue. It's partitioned. It's interest groups. It's sophistry. It's spin doctors. No consensus. There's no we. There cannot be we, the people here. Democracy, in our vision, 1776 founding, is for we, the people, hold the power. Then we become we here when we're weing and woven together in nonviolent diversity, rather than partitioned and fragmented and vying for dominance in that space. That is not democracy. Demos, we the people. So I'm taking a moment to just get ready. This is really a portal into stage 2 meditations, where I'm trying to announce and share with you that if you're interested in going deeper into this journey, and I hope you are, because it's life and death. Because if we're raising our children here, and where our children are born to be Logos sapiens, and if we're packaging them without even knowing what we're doing in this box as an object, and objectifying and teaching them how to use that technology without being good parents, but inadvertently doing something that can be profoundly violent and violating the nature of each other. If we're slashing whatever we objectify, if we're slashing into objectify into an it, into an object, into a being, into an entity, if we're doing that, and that is violent from this point of view of source medicine, then we need to know it and see it. Because it's going to lead to an abysmal repetition of human suffering. When our kids are alienated and suffering and looking for meaning, and meaning is here, but they're stuck in this space of this culture that we schooled into them and parented into them. What if that is not the most competent, intelligent way to parent and raise a child, a sacred child? It takes a human to raise a child. It takes source intelligence to raise, and deep dialogue art to raise a sacred being in I-thou space, not I-it space. If we're itifying one another, then we're violating without realizing or intending. We could be violating each other and cutting each other off because we sever ourselves. So to play this game in a naive and to be duped by it, and not to choose it, but to have it choose you, is to be colonized by a regime of culture making and meaning making and world making and self making and political making and love making that is cutting us off from the genuine, real source thriving. Substance abuse, addiction. When we begin to look at our culture, the life of our people and ourselves, my inner psyche is fragmented. I'm living multiple worlds and I don't know how to bring my religious. I'm a practicing Jew, a Christian, a Muslim. I walk spiritual life. I'm practicing yoga. I'm practicing Buddhism. I'm a citizen. I'm a global. I want to be a citizen. I want to keep my religion and spirituality out of my political life. So all of these multiple narratives, I'm living those multiple lenses, and I can't bring them together. They're broken apart. I can't find real integrity. I mean, I'm disintegrated. I'm without integrity. So integral science is not here. This is disintegral by its nature. It disintegrates because it's living under the law. A is A. Everything has its ID. Time is time, space is space, color, figure, motion, and every name gives a tag. And I'm Christian, you're a Jew, and you're Muslim, and the worlds are given tags, and every identity breaks apart, and therefore it's fragmented, and it cannot be brought into a unum pluribus, multiplicity. So it's fragmented. There's chronic fragmentation. What is it caused by the motherboard that dominates our culture making? So at every point in life, when we're situated in our psychic life, we know people are suffering, going to therapy and psychiatric counseling and life coaching and self-help, to find meaning, to find well-being. We're doing yoga. We're doing all kinds of exercises and spiritual practices here. Why? Because we're longing for well-being and flourishing. We're aging prematurely, and we want to find the magic of overcoming aging. That's a human quest for life. But the call to life is here. And if we're trying all of these strategies in this space, we're bound to fail. And I think we need to ask the teachers that we favor, and the life guides that we choose, and the best-selling authors who are coaching us into awakening, into flourishing, into joy, into the high life. Are they calling this out? Because if they're feeding wisdom and life coaching and coaching you here inside the space, which is what's going on. You can't just bypass directly and barge into that place and go swimming with dolphins here. Swimming with dolphins, it's still this. Of course we can go into the zone. We know that. Athletes spontaneously go into the zone. Dancers, performers, musicians, lovers. We tap the zone. We get out of this space. Why? Because this is always calling us. The infinite force is always acting on us. We saw that here. That I is always surrounded by the double brackets. My high self is closer to me than I am. Your high self is closer to you. This is closer to you. This cannot be pushed away. That's headline news. The infinite cannot be pushed away. Even though we have this alienation, it's still in every iota, in every grain of sand, in every event, in every breath. The infinite is right there. That's one of the revolutionary and evolutionary points of source science. The infinite is right here, right now. So be here now. That's one of the mantras of wisdom. It cannot be achieved here. Be here now. Here and now and being are connected in the zone of being, of source ontology, of medical ontology. So we can't heal our ailments here. So when we looked into the first 6 meditations, was attempting to see, wow, what a struggle for Buddha, who's breaking through an enlightenment to bring the teaching to the people here. Buddha despaired. Why? Because it's inevitable that the people living here are going to use the technology that's familiar, and that's totally understandable, to interpret and download what the teachers are bringing to us. We download it here. Jesus is speaking here, we download it here. The Gospels, when Jesus is speaking, the disciples didn't get it. They struggled with that. Who are you? Who is the Christ? How can you be the Son of God, the Son of Logos, the Logos in the flesh? Is that the blueprint for all humans, or is it just a unique one and only Christ? And we get disagreements in the Gospels between the hidden Gospel of Thomas, that's saying that there's God in every person. There's Christ in every person. We're all Christed. What does that mean? We're all coded with it that we're Logos Sapiens. We're Logos Sapiens. So the tensions between John and in the beginning is the Logos and his view of Christ, and his one and only Son, and then you hear Buddha. Who's Buddha? Buddha is the living force, the living Logos in the flesh, Buddha. The Buddha in the flesh. Who's Krishna? Krishna is the incarnation of Om. So all of these different narratives here, and the great teachers who embody it, have realized that you got to live it. You got to be the script. That's source science. That's the missing source code. The code of all codes is here. And if you're decoded by this code, and we're all living under the sway of talk about it, everything has its name and identity. That's a natural stage of development. And it's dominant. It's a dominant phase, but it's adolescent, as we saw. And the greatest call is to now move and cross individually and collectively as people into the space of source intelligence, into the Logos, into rational being. So reason is the Logos, and reason is connected, and that's coherence is here. And connectivity is here. That's the Logos. That's reason. And reason is here. But this stage of reason, this Logos here, is still not matured into its source. So this opening seventh meditation, which is rehearsing and reminding us of the astounding news and breakthrough of tapping source science, medical science, the medicine of source, and therefore standing back and seeing this situation, and that there is a motherboard that's controlling our lives and culture and religions and interpretations and experiences and human relations and raising our children and all of the different pathologies that are arising due to this. That has not been seen. The single bracket smotherboard has not been adequately seen within here. It cannot be seen. You need to step back to see this. And in order to cross and truly let this go, to live a life here, to rehabilitate our human cultural space and personal, cultural, institutional space here, is going to require to call this out and learn the great patterns of making the crossing from monologue, I, it, to dialogue, deep dialogue, I, thou, to nonviolence, from violence to nonviolence. That's when we begin to flourish, individually and as cultures, and as families, and as lovers. Because relationships here and links here are not deep enough. The link here is an immediate communion of I, thou. That's a deep link, an unum link, infinite connectivity. To experience that, that is our human journey. That's when we heal and become whole beings. This is integral. You can't have integral intelligence here. Although any thinker who's alleging to present us with integral thinking or integral consciousness, but is not calling out the smotherboard explicitly, which is disintegral, and understanding the alienation here and the great crossing, and that the missing code is not helping us get into integral. If you're doing yoga and you're doing it here, you're not doing yoga. And I dare to say, if you're practicing Christianity here, in this space, if this is where your belief system is, and your religious narrative here, you're not tapping the Word of God. You're not tapping the Christ. We're not hearing Jesus. We're not hearing Buddha. This is the monumental disclosure. So what I would like to do in this second stage is, now let's do the science. Because everything turns on that. Because if it's true that we're living in this motherboard, and that this is where we're disintegrated, and this is our invisible crisis because we can't see it, and that's what makes it even more of a crisis, that we can't see it. We need to see it by getting the code. When we get the code, we go deeper, and we can now see, wow, this is the journey of humanity. So just to sum up this introductory meditation, what we'd like to do now is to go in some detail to see why substance abuse, addiction, is traceable to the single bracket space. All the manyest forms, substance abuse, right, of all, whether it's alcohol or other kinds of, or obsession with money, or any what the stuff is, the objects that we're addicted to, or sexual addiction, whatever the addictive behavior is traceable to the addict who is ensnared within this code, this culture code. Our culture spawns addiction. It's an addiction to this code that has been invisible. So all of the external symptoms of addictions are traceable back to the deep addiction. And Buddha got that. Existence is suffering. It has a cause, attachment, addiction to this pattern. And we have a choice, and we can really rehabilitate, that's arrow, and rehabilitate our lives into mindful Buddha space, the Dharma of Buddha. For example, that's a medical. And Buddha was aware. He says, I'm here to bring medicine. I want to stop the suffering medically and get us into well-being, into flourishing. So those who are trying to deal with addiction, addictive, whether it's alcohol or any other substances, don't realize that we make ourselves substances here. When you package yourself here as a subject upon which you think and your ID, and you make yourself an entity, you're addicted to being a substance. A substance is an entity, a being, and being addicted to that being is a substance abuse because you're deeper than that. These are huge points I'm making medically. That our great attempts to do activism within this space is doomed to hit the wall and bounce back and not really cross over. The greatest activism is to call out the smotherboard step back and listen to the great strategies and methods that have been tested over centuries of how to go from mindless to mindful, pre-yoga to yoga, pre-Christ to Christ, pre-Buddha to Buddha, pre-source to source, pre-science to science. Every field in this space can be upgraded to a deeper voltage and power. This is huge. And this is a future. And so I'm inviting you to build on the first 6 meditations and this transition now into this stage 2 sequence of guided meditations into decades of research and centuries of research, calling our great teachers to help us get this. That's what we intend to do in this stage 2, deepening. And to see what has never been seen before, which is the smotherboard that dominates our cultural lives, our religious lives, our scientific lives, our educational lives, our love lives. Every aspect of our cultural life in this space is laboring under a smotherboard that's generating pathologies and dysfunctions. And we've never seen this clearly. And our great teachers were trying to find a way to call it out to us. And we didn't have the single bracket, we didn't have the double bracket. They were just all lumped into the same conflated space, and therefore it was just churning in chaos, and we couldn't get the word of God clearly. The word of source. You have to decompress it, the files. This file, double bracket, is not the same as this single bracket. They were lumped together. And invariably, the regime of single bracket always downloads the double bracket here, and now it's time to stop that, see this, and upscript, and not download. We have to upscript ourselves into the human space of deep dialogue. So what we're going to go through is to see what is it about this way of being a human and living in this culture and all aspects of our lives and experience in this space that's going to be fragmented and polarized and dualized and separated and not united and connected and flowing in connectivity. What is it about that space that fragments our worlds and is the medical source of Holocaust and genocide and ethnic cleansing and racism and sexism and homophobia and misology and misogyny and the violence to women and to children and on and substance abuse and the breakdown of the civic space. To get civility in our civic space, we've got to go into a civilized space. The source space is the civilized space of nonviolence. That's where so trying to get civility here is going to trying to get peace here when the worlds are at war by the very nature of the technology that keeps us worlds apart. Gender is broken here. Gender polarity. One after the other. Cultural disorders that are existential or ontological sickness. So that's a word I'd like us to think about. Medical ontology. The science, source science, is medical ontology to heal our broken ontos or being. And therefore many of our disorders that we didn't see were connected are really connected by being desourced. That's the breakthrough. Widespread human dysfunctions and pathologies, as wide-ranging as they are, we weren't able to connect them and see, wow, they're being generated by a technology, a motherboard that keeps fragmenting and polarizing, and we can't heal in this cut-off space. So any attempt to heal the problems in here, as great and brilliant as our activists are, if they're trying to solve the problems within the space, is generating the pathologies of our environment and our violence to nature and to each other and all of the mismanagement of economics and injustices in economic, and the resources of humanity and the inhumanity that's going on here. You can't solve it within the space. You solve it by opening up the space, the medical space. This is where the humans flourish together as a human family in all of our diversity. And this is where science comes to full power, cognition, knowledge, in the double bracket space, because you want coherence, you want to connect the dots. This is where Einstein was beginning to open the space, and Buddha was opening the space to relativity of relationality. Relations here are artificial. Relation here is beautiful, flowing. So these are many powerful themes that we want to go into in our second, deeper journey now, to see how widespread pathologies trace to this motherboard, and we can only see it with source science and the source code that our great teachers are opening up for us. And to see that any attempt to solve our maladies and to even name them properly, we can't name the ontological malpractice of this space, of this cultural space. Many of the pathologies need to be named and seen as ontological dysfunctions in order to heal. So that's one of the great themes, is to see that widespread human dysfunctions and things that have been normalized, how we raise our children, what's going on in our schools, what goes on in our home with our children, with the siblings, with the couples, right? With interpersonal in the workplace, the civic space, intercultural across borders, across religions, across worlds, across disciplines. All of these boundaries are shattering each other. And to solve that, to find real peace, we have to go into the peace zone. This is the love zone, the peace zone, the nonviolent zone, the flourishing, the dialogue space, the monologue is here. So we'd like to say, in the light of source science, what is true activism? If you don't have vision, activision, if you don't have the vision, the source vision here, the missing source code, if you can't see what our great teachers are calling us to see, and to open this lens, not this lens, not here, but this lens, that's the ultimate activism. Activision is to see, and that's awakening enlightenment in the light of the Logos, in the Sophia, the wisdom. This is wisdom. It's not here, it's not information. Wisdom and enlightenment and spirituality is not here. It's in the spiritual space. And therefore, to make this crossing, we can't do it episodically. You've got to call out this motherboard and understand that this barrier has got to be removed to really cross into a healthful, whole, integral, loving, compassionate human space of being in the zone of the source. And all of our great religions and scriptures and narratives and disciplines must come out of that infinite space. It cannot not. It's all in here. It's all being sourced. All of our worlds and narratives and perspectives and ideologies, as much as they're competing and clashing here, must be sourced from the source of all possible worlds. So one of the great revelations and breakthroughs of source ontology and source science is all narratives are sourced by the source. It cannot not be. And when we get the source code, we can then find the way to see the connection between Genesis and Big Bang, and between our competing materialism and spiritualism, idealism, pantheism, theism, deism. All of these isms that are in this space couldn't be without the source word. That's astounding to realize, that when you get the infinite unum and have the code to actually experience the deep link across our diverse narratives and ideologies and worldviews, and religions and scriptures and disciplines, and to experience and research and bring out the connectivity, that's a game changer. So these are the themes that we'd like to go deeper into. Why is it that the motherboard smothers? Why haven't we seen it? Why has humanity been lodged in a deep, invisible crisis that's life-threatening to our species? We're an endangered species. Why? Because we're culture sapiens. And our cultures here are broken and not sustainable. And we have to get the technology and upgrade to a deeper rational connection and dialogue, art, in order to sustain our cultures. That's the space in which, that's our ecology and our habitat. And if our cultural spaces are disintegral and falling apart, and we can't have democracy and civic life and civil life and moral life and spiritual life and rational life here, then this is endangered. This technology, as much as it may have helped us to get information, is now being disinformation. And we need to really graduate and upgrade and upscript out of that space in order to flourish. So in these next following sequel meditations of part 2, let us go deeper. Let's do the science. Let us understand that there is a motherboard, We couldn't see it. That's huge. Single bracket. It's a smotherboard. That's huge. It's cutting us off from connectivity. That all the infinite pluribus unum is the source of all possibilities, all worlds, all narratives. That's huge. To experience that and see that our great scriptures, that Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and Moses and Muhammad, there's a connection. That Allah and Yahweh and Brahman and Shunyata and Tao, all of these are deeply connected because the name of the infinite has to be infinitely unum. As diverse as they are, the pluribus as they are also connected in the unum. That's pluribus unum. So that motto in the American penny, E pluribus unum, and the founding fathers, is huge if we understand that that's the call for this code. This is the code for the birthing of America. The unfinished American Revolution is here. If we're still here, then we're still colonized. We're not a free people. So to the journey as a people into the zone of deep dialogue, respect, and honor, of humanizing the space, this is the liberation, emancipation, proclamation of liberation of humans. That's the space I believe that Martin Luther King was pointing to. I may not get there with you. This is the pointer. This place is civil rights, a broken place, the segregation, the degradation, right? The brokenness of culture here. The America is waiting here. And it's science. It's time for us to get the source science. For over 2,500 years, our great teachers have been calling us to upscript, but we keep downloading into this space. So we in this meditative journey, again, we're not just going to talk about it. We can't just talk about it. Obviously, we've got the meditative journey is a crossing. The meditation is source medicine, if it's proper, and that's what my intention as your coach in this journey, stage 2, to build on stage 1, our journey into source life and the source missing source code. Now we need to really do the science and bring it home to ourselves to really see and ask, am I using single bracket life? Am I living under that regime? Am I slashing out my kids and my lover and my other and my neighbor and objectifying them without intending to? Is that really going on? Can I live a more compassionate, humane life and fulfill the great scriptures of our great teachers? Huge questions. Everything turns on this. And this is what we'll do in the next follow-up, 8th meditation. We'll go deeper into this space and to see why it's widespread pathologies have not been named deeply as ontological dysfunctions, and why ontological medicine will begin to diagnose and find the way to see the connections that we cannot see here from this point of view, from this science, and to then move into ontological well-being. And to understand why our great teachers and activists who are trying to solve the problem in the single bracket space without calling it out, please, we need to now call it out. We need to ask our teachers, how do we get through the deeply entrenched barriers that our greatest geniuses for centuries struggle to name? The struggle of Buddha to allow the listeners and the people who are living in the single bracket space to hear the Buddha voice. It's been 2,500 years to struggle to upgrade the people. The yoga, to call the yoga is the quieting of this. Yoga is to stop this. Yoga is here, but we're still not doing yoga. How many centuries do we need to get the medicine? Christ, the I am the way. So how many Christians are really understanding the source Christ and the source code? How many Jews are understanding Moses and Abraham? Question mark. So let's pause. This has been intense. I understand. And it's obvious I'm passionate about this because I really believe our future well-being turns on this, and we must get it now. We humans are facing a deep crisis, and the cultural space is like a cultural Titanic, and it's busted, and it's urgent that we now face it and move to higher ground. So this is life and death, this meditative journey. So stay with me, and we'll continue in the meditation 8 to to go more deeply into the source of our fragmentation. And let's see exactly why the single bracket is a motherboard, and that is real, and it's a motherboard, and that's real. And that the only true effective activism is to tap the code, the missing code of I am, of awakening the mind, of enlightenment, of wisdom, of entering the Logosophia. That is the pathway of our human maturation. Thank you for joining me. See you next time.